The date is December 13, 2003. The location is a nondescript patch of farmland in Ad-Dawr, a rural village huddled along the winding, silt-heavy banks of the Tigris River. To an orbital satellite, this place is nothing, a collection of orange groves, mud brick huts, and the rhythmic metallic clatter of irrigation pumps. But on the ground, the air vibrates with a frequency that only those trained in the art of high-stakes extraction can feel. The sun has long since set, leaving the landscape in a state of total blackout. The only light comes from the ghostly green phosphorescence of Generation 3 night vision goggles worn by the operators of Task Force 121. They move with a predatory brace, their boots barely disturbing the dry Iraqi soil. For 9 months, the man they are seeking has been more than a person. He has been a geopolitical ghost. He has bypassed the most advanced electronic net ever cast by a superpower. He has survived the shock and awe campaign, the collapse of his military, and the death of his heirs. The world remembers him as a figure of bronze statues and military parades, but the reality currently hidden beneath the earth is far more primal. This is not a story of a leader in a palace. This is a story of a man returning to the soil of his ancestors to hide in a space no larger than a coffin. In the back of an armored vehicle, a man known to the intelligence teams as Mohammed Ibrahim sits in silence. He is the keeper of the final secret. His hands are bound, and his eyes reflect a cocktail of terror and resignation. He is the human key. For months, the coalition forces tried to find the leader by looking at the top of the pyramid, the generals, the ministers, the ace of spades. But tonight, they are following the path of the invisible people. To understand why it took 249 days to find a man who never left a 30-mile radius of his hometown, we must examine the failure of modern technology against ancient tribalism. When Baghdad fell in April 2003, the deck of cards was the primary focus. This was a linear approach to intelligence. Capture the leadership, and the head of the snake will reveal itself. But the former president understood something the Pentagon did not. He knew that in the Middle East, power is not just institutional, it is biological. The moment the first cruise missiles hit Baghdad, he severed all electronic ties. No cell phones, no radio transmissions, no satellite uplinks. He stepped back into the 12th century, relying on a human firewall. This firewall was composed of the Al-Bu-Nasir tribe. Their loyalty was forged in the desert, based on asabiya, the concept of social solidarity. While the US military was monitoring the airwaves for signals, the former leader was communicating via handwritten notes carried by couriers on bicycles and farm tractors. The search hit a wall. Raids on luxury villas turned up empty. Interrogations of captured generals yielded nothing because the generals had been discarded. The man who had once commanded the 4th largest army in the world was now being protected by shepherds and drivers. The high-tech net was looking for a shark in the open ocean, but the shark had buried itself in the mud of a tidal flat. The shift in the hunt began with a man named Eric Maddox. Maddox was an army interrogator who arrived in Iraq not with a team of commandos, but with a stack of notebooks and a different way of thinking. He realized that the deck of cards was a distraction. He began a process called link analysis. Maddox didn't care about the generals. He began asking about the unimportant people. Who was the man who drove the leader's mother to the doctor? Who was the childhood friend who managed the family's orange groves? He began to draw a map that looked less like a military hierarchy and more like a family tree. Maddox spent 18 hours a day in sweltering plywood rooms, listening to the stories of detainees. He was looking for the Al-Muslit family. This specific branch of the tribe was the inner sanctum. They were the gatekeepers. One detail haunted Maddox, the leader's obsession with tradition. He was told that even on the run, the subject demanded muskuf, traditional Iraqi grilled carp.
This required a specific setup: fresh fish from the Tigris, fruit wood for the fire, and a trusted cook. Maddox began tracking the movement of luxury food items and specialized cooks into rural areas surrounding Tikrit. He wasn't tracking a leader, he was tracking a biological footprint. By December, Maddox's map had narrowed down to one man, Mohammed Ibrahim Omar al-Muslit. Ibrahim was the director of the leader's personal security. He was the only one who knew the rotation of the safe holes. On December 12th, a raid in Baghdad finally snared him. The interrogation of Mohammed Ibrahim was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Ibrahim was the last man standing. His world had collapsed. He was exhausted, and the weight of the secret had become a physical burden. History suggests that the break happened when Ibrahim realized that the search teams were not going to leave until they had the location. In the early hours of December 13th, Ibrahim sat down with a map. He pointed to a small, isolated farm in Ad-Dawr. He didn't point to a house, he pointed to a patch of dirt near a palm tree. The task force moved. Operation Red Dawn was green-lit. This wasn't a mission to capture a city, it was a mission to capture a square yard of soil. The raid was divided into two target sites, Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. Colonel Hickey led the conventional forces, while the Task Force 121 handled the direct action. As the helicopters touched down, the dust of the Iraqi desert swirled into a blinding haze. The soldiers breached the farmhouse. Inside, they found a scene of total poverty. 2 rooms, a small grease-stained stove, a pile of old clothes. It looked like the home of a destitute farmer. They found 2 men, the Namik brothers, who were immediately detained. But the subject was not there. The soldiers swept the orange groves. They used thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar. Nothing. For a few agonizing minutes, it looked like another dry hole. The tension among the operators was at a breaking point. Then, they brought out Ibrahim. He was walked into the courtyard. He didn't look at the houses, he looked at the ground. Near a small lean-to kitchen, he stopped. Without a word, he kicked a pile of trash and dirt with the toe of his boot. The soldiers descended on the spot. They pulled back a rug, they cleared away bricks, and there it was, a piece of white styrofoam, meticulously cut to look like the surrounding earth. When the styrofoam lid was lifted, the soldiers were greeted with the smell of rot, stale air, and unwashed humanity. This was the Spider Hole. It was a vertical shaft, 6 feet deep, leading to a horizontal crawl space barely large enough for a man to lie flat on his back. This was the grave of a power structure. The walls were reinforced with crude concrete and brick. There was a single 3-inch plastic pipe for ventilation, hidden in a clump of weeds. Inside the Spider Hole, the searchers found a strange assortment of items. A Glock 18, a high-capacity, fully automatic weapon, was loaded with a round in the chamber. He had the means to resist, but he chose not to. They found $750,000 in cash wrapped in plastic, 2 AK-47s leaning against the wall, a small mirror, and a book of poetry. The man who had once lived in palaces with gold-plated faucets was now existing in a space smaller than a guest house bathroom. A soldier prepared to drop a flashbang into the hole, but as he reached for the pin, a voice emerged from the darkness. It was a voice that had been heard on radio broadcasts for 30 years, but now it sounded hollow, echoing from the bottom of a well. "Don't shoot, don't shoot." 2 hands appeared, trembling and covered in gray dust. The soldiers grabbed the wrists and hauled the figure out. The man who emerged looked like a castaway from a forgotten island. His hair was long, matted, and wild. His beard was a thick thicket of gray. His eyes blinked painfully against the tactical lights. He looked at the soldiers, men half his age, carrying weapons more advanced than anything his army had ever possessed, and he spoke in English. "I am Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I am willing to negotiate." The response from the operator was a legendary piece of military brevity. Regards from President Bush. The capture was only the beginning. The next phase was the war of images. The coalition forces knew that the resistance was fueled by the myth of the leader's return. To end that, they had to kill the myth. The decision was made to release the medical footage. This is one of the most significant psychological operations in history. The world saw the former president sitting on a chair, being examined by an American military doctor.
The camera lingered on the details, the doctor checking his hair for lice, the tongue depressor being used to check his throat, the flashlight peering into his eyes. This was the medicalization of the leader. By treating him as a clinical subject, a patient, the military stripped him of his political power. He was no longer a leader, he was a body being processed by a superior system. In the background of the farmhouse, searchers found his final writings. He had been writing a novel, a romance titled Zabiba and the King. He had been living in a fantasy world of literature while his country was in the midst of a radical transformation. The transition from high-value target to defendant began immediately. He was moved to a secure location near Baghdad. In the first time in his life, he was subject to a law that he had not written. The trial, which began in 2004, was a centerpiece of the new Iraq. It was a chaotic proceeding. He used the courtroom as a stage, attempting to regain his stature through rhetoric. But the evidence was overwhelming. Signed documents, mass graves, and the testimony of those who had survived the previous decades. The trial focused on the Dujail massacre of 1982. In November 2006, the verdict was delivered: death by hanging. The execution took place on December 30th, 2006. It was the day of Eid al-Adha. The timing was highly symbolic and deeply divisive. The footage of the execution, captured on a mobile phone, leaked to the world. It showed a man who, in his final moments, had regained a measure of his former composure. As the trap door opened, an era came to a definitive, physical end. But the removal of the central figure did not bring the peace that many had predicted. The human firewall that had protected him transformed into a new kind of resistance. The tribal loyalties that had hidden him in a hole in the ground became the basis for a decade of conflict. The Spider Hole at Ad-Dawr is now filled with dirt. The farm has returned to the quiet anonymity of the Iraqi countryside. But the lessons of Operation Red Dawn remain a cornerstone of modern intelligence. It proved that in the age of the drone, the most powerful weapon is still the human source. It proved that a leader's power is only as strong as the people who are willing to hide him in their backyard. The story of how he was found is not a story of a great battle. It is a story of a man who owned everything, ending up with nothing but a suitcase of cash and a mirror in a hole in the dirt. It is a story of the gatekeeper who kicked the ground and changed the course of history. As we look back at the grainy footage of 2003, we see the moment where the 20th century style of leadership, the cult of personality, collided with the 21st century style of warfare, the decentralized network and the night vision lens. Today, the Tigris still flows past Ad-Dawr, the orange groves still grow. The people there still remember the night the helicopters came. To some, he was a protector. To others, a shadow, but to history, he is the man who was found in a hole. The hunt for the Ace of Spades was the end of a chase, but it was the beginning of a much larger question about the nature of power and the price of loyalty. What was the fatal mistake that led the search to that specific patch of dirt? Was it the obsession with tradition? Was it the trust in the gatekeeper? Or was it simply the fact that history eventually catches up with everyone, no matter how deep they dig? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this deep dive into Operation Red Dawn insightful, hit the like button and subscribe for more cinematic historical breakdowns. Until the next mission.